Good afternoon. This is the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, meeting number 18, Tuesday, April 1st, 2014. The orders of the day are to study a report on strengthening the protection of women in our immigration system. This meeting is televised. As you know, or maybe you don't know, the bells are going to ring at 5:15. So we will cut short both the first and the second hour. So this first hour will end at 4:20. We have three guests, three witnesses, representative from the Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic, Ms. Go. How do you do? We have a professor from the University of Ottawa, Christine Strahl. We have the President of the Muslim Canadian Congress, Mohammed Khan. Good afternoon to you, sir. And you each have up to 8 minutes to speak. Mr. Khan, we will have you go first.
Thank you. Honorable members of House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, thank you for giving the Muslim Canadian Congress the opportunity to speak on a matter that affects many members of our community and has contributed to the rise of gender apartheid within many Muslim households. We are deeply concerned that despite the advances made in ensuring gender equality in Canadian mainstream society, the values have not filtered down and at times not embraced by the new Canadians who migrate here with deep-seated beliefs in the second-class status of women in the society. We are glad that your committee is looking into ways to rectify this situation. In view of the question raised before us for recommendations, we are making the following recommendations. To ensure that sponsor spouses have the skills they needed to succeed in Canada, it is imperative that unless and until the spouse possesses a working knowledge of one of Canada's official languages, it is our experience that spouses have the skill they need to succeed in Canada. It is imperative that unless and until it is our experience that spouses who arrive in Canada without the ability to speak either English or French find it very difficult to be productive members of society and live at home at the mercy of their spouses. In order to better prevent vulnerable women from being victimized by an abusive sponsor, we recommend that each arriving spouse should be properly debriefed as new immigrant about the rights, duties, and Canadian values. This should be handled preferably by the government agencies. We strongly recommend that the government facilitate the creation of such a volunteer network of a second-generation Canadian woman and not fall into the trap of the creating NGOs or paid groups. To ensure that the vulnerable spouses are protected and have the skill they need to succeed independently, it is crucial that they have necessary language skills, the social network, as well as knowledge of their individual human rights. If these prerequisites are not met, the task of the protecting newly arrived spouses from abuse will become difficult. Forced marriages. Forced marriage is violation of fundamental rights and right to self-determined life. One of the underreported tragedies of Canada's spousal sponsorship scheme is the issue of forced marriages of Canadian girls and the young women by their parents. As was witnessed in the recent honor killing of Toronto's Shar Bano Shadabi, who was murdered by her husband, brought here after a forced marriage by her parents. According to the report of the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario, which questioned different 30 social service agencies and found 219 forced marriages cases between 2010 to 2012. The report found that the parents, siblings, extended family, grandparents, and religious leaders were all involved in pushing individuals into a forced marriage. The reasons were mostly cultural, 66%, but honor, money, and immigration purposes were also behind some forced marriages. Young girls are taken away from Canada by their parents under the excuse of visit back home, where they are forced to marry cousins who are later sponsored back into Canada. We recommend that in all such sponsorships, the young women involved must be interviewed in a private and away from her parents or siblings to determine if the marriage was forced on her against her will. We recommend that the forced marriage be determined as a criminal offense in which the person responsible for such conspiracy must face jail time. UK has established special unit to provide 24 hours helpline to the victim of forced marriages, and UN has also taken initiative to stop the forced marriages. Polygamy, we are concerned that despite the polygamy being criminal offense, it is gathering acceptance mainly in Canada's Muslim community, and law is being blatantly ignored with serious consequences for the second and, in some cases, third wives who come to Canada as a maid and house workers. Unless these men who are carrying out this medieval practice and flaunting the law are brought to justice and convicted, this trend will gain strength and validation from the clerics in our mosques who have already given their nod of approval to this horrendous practice. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Khan, for your presentation. And when we hear from the other speakers, we'll probably have some questions of you. So, Ms. Goh, welcome to you, and you too have up to 8 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Thank you. And my name is Avi Goh. I'm the clinic director of the Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Asian Leo Clinic. We're a nonprofit community organization that provides free legal services to low-income immigrants and refugees from the communities in Toronto. And we've been around since 1987, and over the 27 years or so, we have served tens of thousands of clients, many of whom are immigrant women, refugee women, and non-status women. And I would like to start by thanking the committee for giving me this opportunity to comment on this important issue as to how the government should strengthen the protection of women in our immigration system. And as mentioned in my written submission, I had the privilege of participating in a roundtable discussion that was hosted by Minister Alexander and Mr. Leach. And so I'm somewhat aware of or familiar with some of the ideas that they have proposed. But given I only have 8 minutes today, so I'm going to focus on just 2 of them. And I will also add some recommendations on my own, which I would like you to consider. But I would like to start by giving an overview or the scope of the issue that we're talking about, which is violence against women in Canada. Obviously, an issue that affects all women in Canada, whether or not they are Canadian-born or foreign-born. So some of the stats I've cited...
Ms. Goh, if you could just stick to new immigrants, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. I understand, but we need to understand the context in which violence against women happens.
I know, but this is not a subject. Stop the clock for a minute. This is not a subject about violence against women. It's an issue of how we can help new women who are moving to this country.
Right. And
so I appreciate your comment on that.
and to prevent violence from happening against these women, right? And violence are happening in Canada to all women, no matter whether they are immigrant or they are Canadian-born, as some of the stats have shown in my paper, including the fact that every 6 days a woman in Canada is killed by her
Ms. Goh, I'm sorry. I want you to stick. I appreciate your thoughts. They may be very valid, but what we're studying here is the issue of new immigrant women coming to Canada.
Right. And the study I'm quoting actually includes new immigrant women as well. So one of the
If
studies...
you could stick to that, I'd
Yeah,
appreciate
sure.
it.
And one of the studies that I have included was a study from Statistics Canada, which look at measuring risks against women. So they look at Aboriginal women, women who are born here, immigrant women, women living in rural or urban area. And they found that educational level and income have no bearing whatsoever on the risk faced by the women as to whether or not they will become victims of violence. And they also found that actually immigrant women have a lower risk of facing violence. But of course, there's a debate as to why that may be the case. But those are the stats that are in front of you. So given that violence against women in Canada is a Canadian issue, and that educational level and income level have no bearing on the risks as to whether violence will take place. So I appreciate, the concern about sponsored immigrant women, but I'm just not sure whether this is where this this is where the focus should be at in terms of imposing language requirements or imposing income requirements on spousal sponsorship. Particularly, I think that imposing a financial requirement on spousal sponsorship is not going to stop violence from happening. Rather, it will just have a discriminatory impact on, whether who can apply to sponsor their spouse. Only those who are rich enough will be able to sponsor their spouse, and those who are poor will not be able to do that. And as to the language requirement or the education requirement, again, the study doesn't show that education level will have any impact whatsoever on whether violence will take place. So rather than helping the women, probably this requirement will just simply mean that fewer women will be able to come to Canada under the spousal sponsorship program because they are not able to meet the language requirement. And I think that there's also sent a wrong message as if somehow the women themselves are to be blamed, because if they have more education, then perhaps they won't be abused, or if they speak English, perhaps they will not be abused, when in fact it has nothing to do with whether or not the abuse would have taken place. And there are other viable more options for the committee to consider. So I would just name some of them. First of all, the conditional permanent resident regulations that came into effect in October 2012, and I'm sure the committee has heard others who comment on this. It actually put the lives of women, sponsored women in danger, notwithstanding the exemptions that exist for cases of abuse and neglect. The reality is that many women who are abused will still have to be forced to choose between coming forward and report the abuse or stay in the abusive relationship. So that should go. Repeal that requirement will reduce violence. Second, many immigrant women experience isolation due to a lack of family support. So, and oftentimes, in my experience serving some of these clients, the only family member they have in Canada is the husband who sponsored them, and in some cases it's the husband who is abusing them. So in order to reduce the isolation, I would suggest that perhaps reducing or eliminating the LICO requirement for sponsorship in the cases where the women are subject to abuse. And third, there are also, we have seen cases where women are being sponsored within Canada by their spouse under the inland spousal sponsorship program. And a lot of time, the sponsorship is being revoked by the husband or the sponsor when the women went to the police to report abuse. And in those cases, the women can seek permanent resident status under the agency application, but that is completely at the discretion of the immigration officer, even though in theory the officers are supposed to be sensitive to the issue of violence. And we have seen cases where violence has been proven, and yet the women are still being denied landing in those kind of situations. So I would recommend a special program being created to address these issues, to allow these women to stay in Canada in those kind of situations. And I also think that more funding should be provided to community organizations. And I agree that, education is important. Resources are important. Women need to know where they can get help. And, if those services can be made available in the first language that they speak, it will assist these women as well. So support and settlement services for immigrant women should be maintained and should be strengthened. And finally, I also believe, and I agree with the ministers, that employment opportunities for immigrant women will also be one way of strengthening, sort of their resolve. And many of them, because they're racialized, they face additional barriers in accessing employment. So perhaps something that the government can do is to strengthen the Employment Equity Act at the federal level, but also work with provinces to make it easier for some of these women, immigrant in general, to get recognition for their foreign credential. So in closing, I think we have many ways that we can protect these women, and it is important to protect women from violence by ensuring that these women have access to unconditional permanent resident status without fear of removal when they report abuse, and by providing them with financial, social, familial support when they find themselves victims of violence. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Goh. Professor Stroll, you are last to speak.
Thank you,
and you
Mr.
too
Chair.
have up to 8 minutes. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. And my comments today are based on my work on Canada's immigration system and its effect on women in general and vulnerable women in particular. The remit of the committee, as formulated in the invitation I received, is to, and I quote, look at ways to ensure sponsored spouses have the skills they need to succeed in Canada, and to examine how to better prevent vulnerable women from being victimized by an abusive sponsor in Canada, end of quote. When looking at the situation of sponsored women in Canada, and in particular those who fall under the provisions of the amendment to the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act that stipulates conditional permanent residency for certain relationships, when looking at the situation of these women, we have to distinguish 3 types of vulnerability to be able to articulate the measures necessary to protect women effectively. The first kind of vulnerability is that of some women's lives in Canada. Many of your witnesses, including my predecessors, so far have commented on the isolation and lack of integration many immigrant women experience, in particular, of course, those who lack language skills when coming to Canada. This vulnerability applies to women in forced marriages as much as to those women whose relationship status may be in question. Here, I believe it fair to say that the NGOs invited so far, and no doubt those still to come, have made a convincing case for the immediate measures that should be taken to address the specific kind of vulnerability. Such measures include access to immigration information in the language of origin and ideally in the country of origin, and they also include access to integration resources and skill development in Canada. The second kind of vulnerability is that of women in general towards their sponsors. Here the fear is, as you have discussed before, that an abusive sponsor can exercise undue influence and power over a sponsored woman by threatening to cancel the sponsorship agreement. This situation is unrelated to the woman's language or professional skill level. As one of your witnesses stated, educated women face this danger as much as those lacking in skills. The difference is, of course, that educated women will more likely have access to the kinds of resources that NGOs and the government provide to get out of abusive relationships. They will be able to report the abuse to the police or find a network of support. And again, I refer here simply to the recommendations so far to address this vulnerability. The third kind of vulnerability is that related to a woman's status as permanent resident. This status may be put in jeopardy if a sponsor cancels the sponsorship agreement. This particular vulnerability is heightened by the fact that the onus lies on the woman to prove that, contrary to the sponsor's statements, the relationship was a bona fide one or that the woman has been abused by the sponsor. If she is able to provide such proof, she will be entitled to the protection of the abuse clause in the Conditional Permanent Residence Amendment. She will be protected from being deported. My concern is with this last kind of vulnerability. So far, many of your witnesses have underlined the difficulty of providing evidence of abuse, particularly, of course, if it is a case of psychological or financial abuse. Second, your witnesses from CIC and CBSA have testified that a lot of weight lies with the immigration officers who have to make a judgment call about whether or not abuse is actually taking place. I certainly believe that the officers in question will most often be sympathetic to the case of the woman making the allegation of abuse. However, it remains that the burden of proof is on the individual woman. Contrast this with the principles that have been adopted by the British Forced Marriage Unit, FMU. This is a unit that was put in place in 2005 to provide, and I quote, practical support, information and advice to anyone who has been through or is at risk of a forced marriage in the UK. End of quote. The FMU, it's worth noting, is a joint initiative between the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Home Office. And the FMU relies on a network of civil society organizations in its work, much as is the case for CIC when dealing with cases of forced marriage here. When interacting with a potential victim, the FMU follows three principles. First, the victim has the right to be believed. Second, show empathy and give confidence. And third, place the victim at the heart of the process. These three principles are worth emulating in the Canadian context, not only for suspected victims of forced marriages, but also for suspected victims of sponsor abuse. There are three reasons why the burden of proof on the individual woman needs to be lightened or ideally be abolished. First, as a society, we accept the principle that a suspect is innocent until found guilty. Yet the suggestion in cases of suspected abuse is that the sponsored woman has to prove her innocence, which is to say that she has to prove that she has been abused in order not to be penalized for leaving the sponsorship relationship, which is to say, in order to not be deported. Second, we need to enable women to apply for permanent residence status independently if need be, and I support here the suggestion made by your earlier witness, Heather Neufeld. This is necessary to avoid the risks of women falling through the cracks of the system, since the humanitarian and compassionate route to access independent residence status is not likely to be successful for lack of evidence that the woman in question is well established and socially integrated in Canada. Again, recall here the accounts that you have received of the isolation that many women experience. In this instance, Canada should adopt a policy akin to the U.S. self-petition procedure under the Violence Against Women Act. This procedure allows immigrant women access to the labor market, and I've provided a fact sheet to the clerk in case there's a need for further information. Instead of making such headways into integrating women into Canada, we embroil women in lengthy procedures to prove that they have been abused and that they're innocent of violating Canadian immigration law and should not be deported. Finally, I believe that any immigration policy needs to keep in mind the issue of civic integration and social cohesion over time. What signal are we sending as a community if we demand of an immigrant woman who aims to become a citizen of Canada that she has to prove her innocence to us in order to be allowed to join the social fabric? One of your earlier witnesses has warned of alienation of young people from immigrant backgrounds, but this is not the only alienation an undue burden of proof may generate. Suspected victims of spousal abuse need to be given the benefit of the doubt of their innocence, and they need to be integrated into laws and policies that apply to Canadians, rather than to be made to feel like second class. The burden of proof that there was an attempt to circumvent Canadian immigration law needs to lie with CIC and CBSA. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent presentations to all three of you. We have Mr. Lung as the first questioner.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for appearing before us. So, Chair, how many minutes do I have? 5. 7. Thank you. What we're dealing with here is, as a fairly modern state, Canada, a state that has embraced multiculturalism and diversity, we have to deal with issues that are rooted in different culture, different mores, and perhaps even different practices that are foreign to us. But what we need to approach this with is that how do we blend us blend our society together so we are, in fact, a very successful modern state of diversity that can accommodate all these issues. And the reason I'm saying that as a preamble is that I want to get into this issue of both forced marriage as well as arranged marriage. And as you know, in many societies around the world outside of North America, arranged marriages are quite common. And what I wish to ask, I'll start with you, Mr. Derek, is that, given all these differences, given very often a marriage of a woman from an immigrant culture is outside of the traditional North American religion, North American mores and cultural practices, how do we, should we treat this as an excluded marriage or this marriage in our immigration system so that we do not subject the woman to abuse? And the second question will follow on is that should we, with raising the age of consent be one solution? And even I'd like to hear your comments with respect to whether the forced marriage unit, as adopted by the UK, would be a solution for us to consider. So let's hear from you first. Mr. Khan, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, first of all, what we need to understand is the different cultural practices are taking place in different countries. And under that shelter, many people, use this kind of a forced marriage, which is socially sanctioned in those societies. And even recently, the bill was passed in Pakistan Assembly by the Islamic Ideological Council to that anyone can marry with the woman of age of from 7 to 7 and up. So it has, this recommendation has been made by the Pakistan's Islamic Ideological Council. So that's, and in defense of this recommendation, they took the plea that our Prophet has married with like 7 or 9 years old Aisha, so why can't we, marry with the women age of like 12 or 16, and determining any age limit is not Islamic or is not rational according to them. So it's similarly like polygamy is common there as well, and most of the Arabic countries. So they are already married with the 2 or 3 wives when they moved to Canada. So first they pretend that they have one wife, but when they come here, they use a different means to bring other wives to Canada as well. And under that religious practices, no one can challenge them, and which is a violation of human rights and all that. I agree with this one that the conditional permanent residence, which is being introduced here in Canada, is not empowering, the women. It is making women further vulnerable because it strengthens the sponsor. It's not strengthening the woman because the sponsor can, revoke that sponsorship anytime. And I have come across like a few cases where a woman educated and her spouse was abusive, and she tried to get help. The problem is that the social network they have around them is most of the community social network. They end up with the religious centers or community centers. And they misdirect them and they mislead them about the cultural variances and religious variances and all that in order to, scare them to approach any, for social, assistance or for any kind of assistance. So I think the education and to debrief the women, about their rights, and permanent residence should not be, revoked or should not be conditional about the woman, and also the cultural practices common in the different countries and socially sanctioned there, like honor killing, and female genital mutilation, and all these are taking place here in even Canada. Like some doctors are performing this female genital mutilation. So we should take all these, practices into consideration and try to encourage the woman so that she should not be vulnerable, that if she approached anyone and her permanent residence would be canceled.
Now, how can the immigration officer take a proactive step in determining whether it is a forced marriage or not? Before they even land on our shores?
I think if the women can separately interviewed by, a different from a different ethnic, community, and where she can easily communicate, and she can probably she has without, in the presence of their, siblings or spouse or anyone, so that could be one of the way to determine whether it is a forced marriage or not forced marriage. And second, like in UK, they have introduced that the woman can carry a spoon in the underwear, and when she will pass through the radar scanner, so that will, start, buzzing, that would know the immigration officers that they are taking away the woman to their country for the forced marriage purposes. So there are different, probably we have a different country.
You have to stop, Mr. Khan, and move on. I'm sorry, Ms. Titsabayisin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses who are here today. Mr. Khan, I'm just going to continue a little bit on what you just spoke about. You spoke, and I only have very short time, so I'm going to ask for brief answers. You spoke of the conditional permanent residence, and I'd like the other, all of our witnesses to respond. And you said that the conditional permanent residence makes the women more vulnerable, actually, and doesn't actually help the situation for the immigrant women who are coming into this country under the spousal sponsorship program. So my question to all three of you is, do you recommend that it should be abolished, the conditional PR process?
Yes.
Yes.
So all three of you, your mic wasn't on, so I just want to get on the record that all three of you just outright say, yes, the conditional PR should be abolished. And do any of you have anything you want to add? If there's, I know that Ms. Go, in your brief that you sent in, you had you say that your organization believes that the proposals such as financial requirements to attack the issue of course, violence against women through the lens of immigration sponsorship, while it may be well-intended, I'm reading from your brief actually, is nevertheless wrong-headed, you said. And you also mentioned that it has a discriminatory impact. Could you go further into detail as to why? And if you want to add to as well.
Sure. I think, the discriminatory impact, I guess you can look at it from two ways. First of all is that if there is an income requirement, that means that only those who will meet the income requirement will be able to sponsor their wife. And, up to this point, the spousal sponsorship so far has not been subject to this requirement, I think because the Canadian government recognizes that spouses and dependent children are an integral part of our family, so they do not want to make a distinction between people who are rich enough to sponsor and those who are not. So, having this becoming a requirement will have that impact on affecting some people who will no longer be able to sponsor. The other side of the discriminatory impact is like the language and the education requirement, because by and large, at least from the stats that I can see, the sponsored spouse, like those who are being sponsored to Canada, tend to be more women than men. Mm-hmm. And I think with more and more people coming in as temporary foreign workers, like, sort of different classes of labor who then transition into permanent resident, I think you will see more and more men coming in than women. And so if they are then to sponsor the spouse, then women will then still be the sponsored. So it will be those women who will not be able to meet the requirement if they don't have the language and education requirements. So it will be women who are being affected by those requirements. So in both ways, both the spousal, the income requirement on the sponsor and the language and education requirements on the sponsored will both have discriminatory impact. On the other hand, I think that, we could look at increasing the age of consent, like, age of marriage. I think that, people in general would agree that's a good idea. And I think the only thing I would say that sometimes, certainly we don't want forced marriage, but I don't know who will be the best person to make that decision about whether it is an arranged marriage versus whether it is a forced marriage, and what kind of training the immigration officer will have to be able to distinguish between the two. I think that's something that we will need to consider.
I don't know how to say your name.
Straley.
Straley, thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to add one point concerning the conditional residency requirement, which is that in your questioning to the people from CIC, what struck me when reading the evidence was that David Manicom said, well, if it's a question of deterring marriage of convenience isn't supposed to come into Canada, right? Mm-hmm. So he was quite clear that it is the immigration officer in the visa office's task to actually look at the documentation and find whether or not a sponsorship application is based on a marriage of convenience or not. He didn't deny that there may be some cases that come in, but as he said, it's very difficult to have any statistics on this. I think that the problem with the conditional permanent residency is that it ultimately creates a two-class system of permanent residence. And again, as I said, civic integration and social cohesion is one of the concerns that Canada will have to face. Canada has done very well until now in this domain, but we don't know if this is going to be the case. And finally, just to follow up, I don't know if you're aware, the age of consent in Denmark is now 25 if a Danish citizen wants to marry somebody from outside the EU, which has created a lot of controversy, but which the Danish government has imposed because of the concern about forced marriage.
You both, if I remember, Ms. Straley and Ms. Goh had mentioned, you spoke about the financial requirements and the language and education requirements and how those are actually hindering women and their ability to be self-sustaining. And we know that immigrant women who have been educated in Canada and can speak English also get violated, also are victims of violence in this country. And you spoke of the increased isolation of the women and the lack of integration because of some of the violence that they go through. Do you want to expand a little bit, please?
I guess from our experience with respect to the isolation, we find that a lot of time because they don't have a lot of family members in Canada, so their family members are the spouse's family members or the spouse. And that's the kind of isolation that we see. And that's why we think that, if there is a way of facilitating family sponsorship for those women who are victims of domestic violence, that will, in fact, allow them to have more family support. And I think having family support is important for someone who is being abused, right? It's like, if you have your siblings or your parents to go to, you can go to the house, like, you have someone to talk to, someone who is standing there with you by your side to facilitate your fleeing the abuse, right? But for a lot of these women, they don't have any family member other than their spouse.
What else do you
recommend?
recommend?
Thank you, Ms. Goh. I'm sorry, Ms. Sitzbees, and we'll have to move on to Mr. McCallum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of you. On this question of language test requirements for spouses, I made the point in the House on Wednesday that this was Orwellian and unacceptable intrusion of government into the decisions of individuals on marriage. And on Wednesday, the minister didn't say much. On Thursday, he said the government wouldn't do it. So I think we can assume it's off the table. Unless he changes his mind. I didn't raise the subject of tests based on income or education, but I think if he's ruled out language, one can assume that he has agreed that it's not the role of the state to dictate who one marries, except for issues of criminality or age. On the question of the conditional permanent residence, I'm glad all three of you have opposed this. The previous 6 witnesses, I asked them all opposed it as well, so we're at 9 out of 9, which is better than 3 out of 3. So I think for me, the big issue coming down in front of us is what can we do in a practical way about women being abused and in an asymmetrical relationship where the woman could be deported if she claims abuse or claims that the marriage is not real or whatever. And I think one idea is to get rid of this conditional permanent residence, because I think that puts power in the hands of the husband, shall we say. But a second thing, I really liked your, Professor Straley, the forced marriage unit, changing the terms of the onus on the person versus not on the woman. And last time we also had a discussion about trying to expedite the process whereby a woman could become a landed immigrant if she was estranged from the marriage, because I understand right now the process is long and potentially expensive, and many of these women don't necessarily have the money or the resources or the support to go through a lengthy process. So I guess all of that is a bit of a preamble. Maybe I'll start with Professor Strail. What do you think would be the primary tools that the government has in order to address this issue of asymmetrical power? Because I think maybe that's the primary difference. You say there's domestic abuse and immigrant abuse. Maybe the main difference is the asymmetrical power on the immigrant side, but not on the domestic side.
Thanks for the question. Yes, I agree. I think it is problematic enough if a woman finds herself in an abusive relationship. But I think, as I tried to make clear in my comments, that it becomes even more problematic if your whole life in Canada is threatened because of the relationship and because of the vulnerability in the relationship. So anything we can do in order to address that is going to make a huge difference. And this is why I think women should have independent access to the possibility to enter the labor force. They also should be supported. But as many of your witnesses said, sometimes they deal with women who are so isolated that they don't even know how to board a bus, right? So there's a lot of work to be done. But I think this is exactly what we need to do. We need to give them the security that they are welcome in Canada, and if they want to become productive members of society, that they should be allowed to do so instead of trying to prove that they're innocent and shouldn't be deported.
Well, Ms. Gold, what about are there ways to expedite this legal or bureaucratic process whereby a woman can achieve the right to permanent residence? Right.
So let's say if you get rid of the conditional permanent resident, so the women who are coming in as sponsored spouse, then they will be permanent resident, like the minute they land, right? So the only situation where I think where a woman is in a spousal relationship and their status is conditional upon the marriage or somehow tied to the sponsor is when they are applying from within Canada. So they are here on some kind of status, maybe visitor, refugee, and then their spouse as a Canadian citizen or permanent resident is sponsoring them. It's those situations, I think, where they are the most vulnerable. And I think, yeah, definitely facilitating the faster processing of these cases. But more importantly, when the sponsorship breaks down, don't automatically send the women back to wherever they come from. But, if the woman can, can provide, well, I guess, somehow they still have to have the burden of proving that there is abuse. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can get around that. But if there's if there are ways of showing that the sponsorship breaks down because of the abuse, then they should be landed no matter what. And I think that's where we see the problem becomes the system becomes problematic. Is that even where the women was able to prove there's abuse, they are still being deported.
Thank you. Mr. Shore, you have a little under 5 minutes.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses. This chair is very tough, so I'll like short answers. But before that, I want to clarify one thing, that in my office, riding office in Calgary Northeast, I got quite a few files dealing with this breach of spousal sponsorship. What that means is that the sponsored spouse, of some of the cases, they did not tell their sponsoring spouse that they got the visa, they're coming to Canada. I have some cases where they did not land into the city even the sponsoring spouse lives. I have the cases where they just waited for the PR card. The moment they get the PR card in their hand, within hours they leave the family. Those are the spousal sponsorship abuses, and I believe that was the reason this conditional permanent resident was introduced, to counter those spousal abuses. And in my belief, I would say elimination of this conditional permanent resident is not a true solution. That is not, because how would we deal with those files? But Mr. Khan, I will like you to make some comments on my question that we all of us know that many cultures have a history of arranged marriages, and when we talk about this marriages of convenience, forced marriages, I am very hopeful that I want to stress that this is not what we are referring to arranged marriages, and we should be very careful not to stigmatize that. So, of course, marriages of convenience do occur under the guise of arranged marriages. We know that. So, from the point of view of your organization, Mr. Khan, what can be done to stem the flow of fraudulent marriages without damaging the image of legitimate arranged marriages?
First of all, I do understand that there is culture of the arranged marriages, so I do not call those arranged marriages as forced marriages, which is common in India and Pakistan and South Asian region. What I'm referring is the forced marriages. We have a lot of cases from UK, and it's a second or third generation living in UK, immigrant generation, and they are born there, and their parents are taking those girls back home and force them to marry, bring their, brothers, sons, or relatives and others, and even they pretend that even there is no consent between or understanding between husband and wife. They force the girl not to open their mouth until he gets the landed papers. So I'm not referring that kind of arranged marriages, but the forced marriages is a problem, honor killing is a problem, and fraudulent marriages. I know that I have come across some cases that if I have 3 sons, I kind of arrange the marriage. I bring my nieces under that sons, but that's not a real marriage. Once they are here, they get the paper, they divorce them, and then those girls sponsor other get married again and sponsor them. So these kind of things are happening. But the thing is this: if you impose conditional residency on the women, it makes women further vulnerable, because it makes more dependent on the sponsor, the sponsor spouse. So I don't think that it's right to see it.
We have to end, so if you just wind up.
Yeah.
No, you have no more. You're finished, particularly after the way you treat the chairman. I want to thank the 3 of you. I'm sorry we have to cut it short because we're going to have to vote earlier. And I want to thank the 3 of you for taking the time. And I'm sorry I had to cut you off, but there's time limits. But I want to, on behalf of the committee, I thank you for coming and giving us your views on this very important subject. Thank you very much. We will suspend. One of our guests is not here. We have Rema Community Services here in Ottawa with us. Talat Muindan, who's the president. Good afternoon to you. And we have Sharon Mandani, who is the executive director. Good afternoon to you, too. And all the way from Burnaby, British Columbia, we have Katie Rosenberger, who is the manager of counseling service. Can you see me now?
No, I cannot see you, but I can hear you.
Oh my! It's probably just as well
us?
It's probably just as well you can't see me. And we have we'll continue to work on it. I hope that you'll be able to see us, because normally you should be able to.
Okay.
Swarandeep Virk, who is the counselor, and she's with you. I assume that's who you are?
Yes, hi.
Thank you. Ms. Rosenberger, I'm going to let you go first.
Thank you.
You have up to 8 minutes. Ms. Rosenberger?
8 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, you are absolutely right.
Count me down.
Thank you.
All right, I will speak fast. So good afternoon. My name is Katie Rosenberger, and I'm presenting with my colleague Swarandeep Virk. I'm the manager of counseling services at Diversity Community Resources Society, and I'm an active member of the Network to Eliminate Violence in Relationships. Swarandeep is a counselor for programs that address violence against women, as well as children who witness the abuse. We work primarily with immigrant families, and I oversee all programs related to violence in relationships, which are facilitated by counselors in our clients' first language. The perspective that we will share today is through our work with clients from many countries, including India, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Colombia, Mexico, Korea, Vietnam, China, and Afghanistan. Our information is based primarily on client testimony of their experience, as well as our work with offenders in our court-mandated offender program. So the issues as we see them, the issue of forced marriage still plays a dominant role in violent relationships. Women report in many cases they are not aware of whom they are marrying, and many details remain unknown about their future spouses until after the marriage. In some cases, women do not know that their spouses have issues such as mental health concerns, alcoholism, anger issues, and financial debts. The women report in some cases once the marriage has happened, their in-laws and spouse will keep secrets and ensure the woman's isolation to prevent her from leaving and accessing support. Isolation can lead to the most severe cases of violence, as the women have no support, no way of leaving the house, and have little to no understanding of the laws and supports that are available to them. Leaving the house or making a phone call can cause severe beatings, and the very presence of the woman in the home is often unknown to the neighbors. This type of isolation is often done with the consent and participation of the spouse and his family, including the mother and sister-in-laws. Isolation may include being accompanied to all appointments, such as the doctor, grocery stores, and even educational programming. These women will not be allowed to work, have access to a phone, and if they are working, it's often in the family business or within constant view of another family member. We also have issues around adoption and forced marriage. Some women report that they were adopted from India or other countries at a young age, only to come to Canada to provide domestic services to the adopted family. Sometimes they are used for the purposes of marriage to enhance the family's status by marrying the young woman to someone wishing to be sponsored for monetary gain. The marriage may end quickly, and then they are expected to remarry another man in order to sponsor him. The adopted child is required to marry as dictated by the adopting family. If these women disagrees, their families in India are often threatened. The woman is humiliated and disowned by her village and extended family, so the option of returning is no longer there. In most cases, women have little or no access to finances or banking. The women report that in some cases they are financially abused through debts and lines of credit that are taken out in their names and then used for the abuser's benefit. In other cases, the spouse will put everything under his parents' name and show no income or property. The women feel trapped as they have no means to support their children or themselves if they were to leave. Some women report that their abusers will have extramarital affairs outside of the marriage on a continual basis. In some cases, the women report that their abusers will have a common law partner living in the home at the same time. Some women report that their partners have additional relationships in their home country. The women report that their partner will maintain both marriages, and abuse will occur when this notion is challenged and if the woman tries to leave. Women report that once arriving in Canada, despite being educated in their country of origin, their spouses do not encourage them to pursue their education or their career. These women report that they're encouraged to seek labor-related jobs or often are not even allowed to work. Many women become pregnant shortly after marriage or are forced to be pregnant in order to ensure a quick immigration process. Women who become pregnant feel trapped as they worry about their children's future and their own inability to care for the needs of their child. Some women report that they are forced to work in menial conditions and then hand over their paychecks to the spouses. Some workers reported that they are at risk in the workplace for sexual harassment and abuse from their employers. Women report being sexually assaulted by their employer, and due to financial constraint, shame, and lack of support from their spouse, do not report the assault. Live-in caregivers have been reporting that they are being abused and sexually assaulted by their employers, but will not report the abuse or leave the home because they don't want to lose their job. Our recommendations. Our experience with our clients is that they are not given the information they need when they arrive in Canada. To validate this feedback, we did a brief survey of our staff, which are mostly educated immigrant women, and learned that only 30% were given sufficient information when they arrived in Canada regarding domestic violence. Many clients not aware of their rights, and they do not have faith that their complaints will be taken seriously because of past experiences with police and law enforcement in their own countries. Although there are services, women with children or women in isolation are riddled with fear based on their past experiences and then the lies that are told to them by their spouses and the extended family. Finances and loss of parental rights are two of the most common concerns reported. The other issue is that when violence is not extreme, and even sometimes when it is, some families do not want to be forcibly separated. Women will stay in an abusive marriage because they want the marriage to work. They want their spouse to stop the violence, but not to leave altogether. This is where there is some serious work that needs to be done, as supports that do currently exist are mostly there once an altercation has occurred. Women will come to see us, Swarandeep and my other team, for stopping the violence counseling. Their children will come for children who witness abuse counseling, or the men will come for court-ordered relationship violence prevention counseling, but are all services that take place after the fact. We do have a family counseling program for couples that wish to address the issues before they result in violence, but the funds are so limited and waitlist is so long that many do not even make it for a session before the tensions take over and then there's violence in the family. Waitlists for services are causing a lack of trust among the community, as they've been told that there are options, that there are things that they can do in order to seek help, but then they have to sit on a wait list and indefinitely wait for it. Our view is prevention is the key to successfully reducing violence in all relationships. The difference is that for our immigrant families, they sometimes do not share the Canadian value or cultural systems and don't know what constitutes violence or abuse in Canada. To many of our client offenders, their behavior would not have been questioned in their home country, and they claim that had they known they were breaking Canadian law, they would not have abused their wives. That's the claim. Many women feel that the abuse they face is normal, and it is not something to share outside the home. We are nervous of challenging the cultures of newcomers to Canada to protect our own values of multiculturalism. But in that process, we're not challenging the elements of newcomers' cultural values that must be challenged in order to protect women and children. We believe there should be a mandatory service, such as workshops, training sessions, counseling sessions, where all immigrants are expected to attend a compulsory orientation regarding the laws, their services, and their rights in Canada. This service could also involve the screening or supportive services to identify abused women prior to entry into Canada or once they arrive here.
Ms. Rosenberger, Ms. Rosenberger, I'm afraid your time has expired. Perhaps you could wind up, please. Would you move to the last?
I could. Let me just get to my last point here then.
Okay.
We recently completed a focus group to address why immigrant women do not reach out to the police, and some suggestions included that there be a centralized phone number, something similar to 911, that women can call and reach someone who can advocate for them. These women also suggested having an insurance or mandatory contribution to an account from people who are sponsoring on a regular basis, and that those women could have access to that money should there be a breakdown in the sponsorship. And then I think we can leave it at that then. But we thank you for allowing us to share our experience.
Thank you for your presentation. Our second speaker is from Espace Féminin Arab. Did I say that right?
Féminin Arabe.
Arab. Khadija Darid is the Director General. Thank you for coming, and you have up to 8 minutes to make your presentation.
Merci.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. So I represent Espace Féminin Arabe, EFA, which is an organization focused on the social and economic integration of Arab women. And our mandate is to support women from the Maghreb and from the Middle East, women from all religions, Muslim, Jewish, or Christian, and we seek to help those women when they arrive in Canada. We are particularly interested in integration and jobs, more specifically, because we believe that there is social violence against that. It's a form of social violence against women if they're not able to work in complete dignity. So at the present time, statistics show that there's a high level of unemployment, 33% in the Arab community. And so it's very important to suggest particular actions that could be taken to fix this issue. Arab women are part of one of the two ethnocultural groups that have the most problems finding jobs because of direct discrimination. There are two groups, Muslim Arabs and black women. This was determined by a particular roundtable. This discrimination can include a refusal to look at these women's CVs, mistreatment because of religious symbols, for example, the veil, or, for example, refusal to remove such a symbol. However, when it comes to promoting social integration, it's suggested when these families arrive that when these women arrive in Quebec, they're in a multicultural area where they have multiple opportunities, and they're often frustrated when they arrive and see the situation on the ground. And so this is incredible violence against women, to not give them the opportunity to work and to earn their livelihood in full dignity. And I have a sentence from Simone de Beauvoir. It's because of work that a woman has managed to close the gap that separated her from man. It's through work that she has been able to get concrete freedom. However, the experience on the labor market is problematic. The women we work with are considered docile or passive, and that's seen to be a problem. And Arab immigrants are considered to be sexualized objects, even by men in the welcoming culture. They're considered to be docile and ignorant. They are the victims of harassment from their employer, from their colleagues, and even in mixed marriages, the immigrant man or woman, the spouse of a Canadian, is still considered as abused. And generally speaking, stakeholders don't understand these women's issues. Their goal is to liberate them with a very feminist vision instead of wanting to work with these women in an interculturalist context. Arab women reject this vision, which is proposed by certain stakeholders. They believe that they are strong. Often they are the drivers behind immigration. They're autonomous, they're ambitious, they have they have what it takes to work in a number of sectors, including the social support sector. They need to support their families, particularly when the spouse, the husband, is looking for a job. Often women will take a job that is below their skill level. many stakeholders have a negative view of these women, and for them, unemployment is seen as proof of their inability to adapt to the labor market, or their unwillingness to adapt to the labor market. So there are major gaps between the way immigrant men and women are seen on the job market. There are issues with the explanations given for their trouble finding a job. There are issues with the feminist point of view that is systematically adopted when dealing with these women, and this contributes directly to discrimination of these women. I can say that the government needs to act quickly to end this social violence towards the Arab community, and also to meet the skill shortage, or to fight the skill shortage in our country. I'd also like to remind you that 33% level of unemployment in the Arab community goes up to 40% when we talk about Arab women. So that's a very high number. We also need to take into account the consequences of unemployment. That leads to tension within families. It leads to mental health problems and mental illness. Remember, immigrant populations are the second, represent the populations the second most affected by mental illness after the senior population. And it's also important to understand that women from Arab countries are the most, are very well educated when compared with the welcoming society.
Alors, j'en ai pas pour...
And I'll wrap up soon. When we talk about family violence, well, I talked about social violence. We need to find ways to give back to women their dignity, because this is how to do it. Often, if women don't have income, the spouse will have economic power over the women. The spouse will be able to abuse of that power, will be able to require certain behaviors. At the same time, there are major effects on the individual, on the person herself, in terms of illness, in terms of suffering, despite the fact that these women come with a great hope to live in a country where equality between men and women is a given, where they think that they'll be able to speak out and reach their full potential in freedom and dignity. I just have one final question, which I will end with, and I know I'm jumping around a bit here, but with a question on young girls who wear a veil, and young Jewish men, young Jewish Hasidic men who wear religious symbols. I'm asking the question, would it be possible to prevent these children from wearing these religious symbols before the age of 16? Is this realistic? In my opinion, I believe that young people are being misled.
But not least, we have Ms. Muandin and Ms. Mandini is going to give the speech. You have an 8-minute speech.
No.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us today. We would like to focus on two aspects: highlight on the common barriers faced by newcomer women, and I'm sure many of them have said the similar aspects. Present recommendations for protecting spousal-sponsored women. Rema Community Services was established in 1999 to provide linguistically and culturally relevant services for seniors, women, and newcomers. Over the past decade, we have done many projects on domestic violence that inform our position for this submission. I will briefly mention specific areas that are relevant. We have realized that to assist women to come out of domestic violence, it is equally important to empower them to become financially independent. Through our skills training program, Rahma Food Enterprises, a one-year certification program, we focused on culinary skills development and business management, enabled many women to break their barriers of employment and join the workforce. However, we find there are continuous challenges which many of our clients face. These are language barriers. Women do not find employment because of language barriers. Most of our clients share that ESL and link classes are not sufficient for employment. They fear to use public transportation, which can restrict their mobility and their access to resources and services, making them socially isolated. Language barrier brings greater dependency on their sponsors. Women with good spoken English interact well with others and have greater understanding about their rights and the services available. In the foreign land, without English, they may become vulnerable to abuse. We recommend that specialized English classes, which are tailored to immigrants' vocations, are needed. Publications, web-based portals, and helpline number on reporting abuse and where to seek assistance from should be in diverse languages. With the help of ethnic print and television media, women should be given information about their rights. We come to the next barrier, economic barriers. Newcomer women find it difficult to get employment because of lack of accreditation and without Canadian education and work experience. The skills they come with are not enough or relevant to the labor market needs. Without employment, they are financially dependent on their sponsors. Women have sponsored their husbands may face further vulnerability if their husbands leave them and seek social assistance. We recommend that before their arrival, they are given information on skills and jobs that are in demand. We also recommend that after they arrive, they are given information and access to skill development programs that are in accord with labor market needs. Settlement difficulties. Women find it very hard to settle down if they do not have a family support or social system. There is an ongoing need to give them relevant information and referral services. Newcomer women find it difficult to live in legal limbo as they are often worried about their permanent residence status. Family separation brings several emotional problems. We recommend that settlement funding for organizations should be reconsidered. Free access to legal services with interpretations should be available for them, and the focus should be towards family unification with less processing time. I would like our President, Mrs. Talat Moinuddin, to brief the committee about cultural barriers.
Mr. Chair, honorable members, thank you for this opportunity to appear before the committee today. My submission will focus on the cultural barriers faced by immigrant women. My family, along with the community leaders from diverse cultures, established organizations to address the needs of the new immigrants: Urban Alliance on Race Relations, Canadian Council of Muslim Women, International Development and Relief Foundation, Vision TV, Women's Intercultural Network, and Rahma Community Services. At Rahma, our projects on domestic violence reached out to marginalized, isolated, impoverished immigrant women. We linked them with services and community organizations. We initiated and designed projects to inform men and women about Canadian laws and develop tools to prevent violence against women. In every project, we emphasized community education by designing workshops, seminars, campaigns, and information sessions. To bring awareness, self-help, and leadership, our grassroots-based work informed us about the cultural barriers, such as Women are expected to maintain and uphold the honor of her and her husband's family. Therefore, reporting family violence is perceived as disrespectful and shameful. Women are afraid to report to the police, as in their home country they distrust the police. Women fear deportation, or abuser may threaten her of deportation in such cases. Women who are abused fear family alienation when they go back to their home country. Women are unwilling to disobey or divorce their abusive husband because they believe marriages are for lifetime and patriarchy is always practiced. Families or religious leaders may instruct women to make every effort to be with their abused husband, whether it is in her best interest or not. Many women would rather suffer in silence instead of speaking up for their rights. We recommend that both during, pre, and post-arrival, women should be made aware of their legal rights in the language they understand. They should be given helpline numbers of the agencies and shelters. We recommend increasing cultural sensitive trainings for police and service providers in dealing with women from diverse cultures. As an advocate for gender equity, equality, and empowerment of women, I believe our system needs to support and protect the rights of women who are in abusive situations. Let us not make the mistake of making abused new immigrant women suffer twice by causing them to become unintended victims of new regulations targeting spousal immigration. I'm glad and thankful that Government of Canada is taking measures to protect the rights of the vulnerable women and not letting them to be further abused by their sponsors.
Thank you. I'm afraid we have to move on, but I thank you. Ms. Rosenberger, can you see us?
Yeah, we can see you now.
Well, I'm pleased that you can see us. Mr. Opitz has some questions for all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you and to our witnesses. First of all, I want to read something from the Discover Canada Guide. It's under the Rights and Responsibilities of Canadian Citizenship, and the subheading is The Equality of Men and Women. And the guide says, excuse me, in Canada, men and women are equal under the law. Canada's openness and generosity do not extend to barbaric cultural practices that tolerate spousal abuse, honor killings, female genital mutilation, forced marriage, or other gender-based violence. Those guilty of these crimes are severely punished under Canada's criminal laws. And this is something that is put into all the guides that we have in most recent years updated, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. Because, Ms. Rosenberger, I tell you, you had steam coming out of my ears, but only because of what you said, not how you said it. Because the way you described these things at the beginning, to me, sounded very much like human trafficking or a form of slavery. And I didn't serve 33 years in this military to allow anybody come to my shores and have to endure conditions that may be worse than where they came from. So to me, that is something that is intolerable, absolutely intolerable. So, for example, since we just talked about the Discover Canada Guide, I'll start with you, Ms. Rosenberger. Do you have any suggestions on how it could be altered to reflect information that would help vulnerable women most? It's written down here already, but clearly it's not always reaching all the ears, or it's concealed from the people that actually need to see it. So, and if they don't speak English and they don't, or French, and are unable to understand what's there, they can't act on their rights. So, your comments, ma'am.
I think taking it one step further, what came to mind for me when you just read that out is the definition of spousal abuse. So my perception of spousal abuse as a born and bred Canadian is different than somebody's perception of spousal abuse when they may come from a country where it is not considered abuse to hit your wife, or it is not considered abuse to use physical violence in order to discipline your children. So while that is one of the suggestions actually that one of our team members had come up with, was why isn't there some sort of declaration out there? And I said to them, there most likely is a declaration, but is it in the language that people can understand? So not just the language, literally translation verbatim, but the language that defines what is spousal abuse. Can you physically take your hand and put it to another person's body? That would be my suggestion as the first place to start on that.
That way we can. Go ahead, Ms. Frick.
And another thing, because you're talking about recommendations, how does a woman who comes here, who from the airport is taken straight to the home, she does not ever access any settlement service, so only when abuse goes to an extreme that the police is involved and victim services is involved, and so she goes to these services. And those women come to us and say that we didn't even know these services existed. So, and when we had recently done a focus group at Diversity where women said that before you come to Canada also, you know there's a 911 number. But when we go to access services, then we go to one place and we are given another number. So there should be one centralized number as 222, 333, where people know, hey, this is where we can know about our rights and laws about Canada.
Okay, because I'm very short on time. You only get about 7 minutes to ask. But you hit on a point. I was going to ask you about the 911 thing, so that I'm delighted you got into that. So if I heard you right just now, one of your suggestions is, so for example, if it's 911 is general emergencies, fire emergencies, violence, whatever, your robbery, but you're suggesting perhaps like a 222 for spousal abuse or something like this.
Like a family is coming here, right? And people don't want to break their families. So there should be something as family strengthening. Hey, we have problems. This is the number we call. There will be a key advocate who will not take us straight to the police, but will understand our problems.
Yeah. Okay. And that also helps to break. It helps to address the issues that many families face towards a lack of trust for the authorities. And so that the stigma of calling 911 and having police come to the house with lights and sirens, that can be a massive deterrent for many of our clients.
Okay, understood.
And here we are talking about a preventive measure.
Okay, Ms. Verk, I'm going to stop you because I'm short on time. I want to give Ms. Mandini an opportunity. Ma'am, how do you reach out to women pre-arrival?
I would suggest that at the embassies in their home country, when they are issued visa, that time they are given something in their language about their rights. And second is when any husband sponsors their spouse, at that time the husbands should also be made aware that when they are bringing their wives, they are supposed to be abiding the Canadian laws.
Okay, Ms. Tarid, I'll ask you the same thing. How would one reach out pre?
À mon avis, il y a un guide canadien qui explique aux nouveaux arrivants.
In my opinion, there's a Canadian guide that explains to new arrivals what the laws are here and what barbaric laws are not accepted here. It seems to me that new immigrants to Canada, men and women, should sign this document and be subject to potential expulsion from the country if they don't respect the rules. And instead of just offering language training sessions, second language training sessions, we should offer women and men who come to Canada training programs on equality between men and women, and teach them about not to use excessive force against children.
Sure, thank you. And absolutely, I think the rights and responsibilities have to be respected. But Ms. Rosenberger, so just one last one to you in terms of definition and defining and allowing women to understand what their rights are. So there would you agree that there might be a program where they arrive to fully brief them, without any family members around?
Ms. Rosenberger?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Then that is something that has that we would like to see happen, where there is some sort of mandatory training on the rights and responsibilities of individuals in Canada as Canadians, and so that would be something that would be put in place in order to even obtain a PR card. You couldn't do it until you had some sort of training in the laws and rights and responsibilities as people here in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Sandhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses, and in particular to Ms. Rosenberg and Ms. Verk, diversity. I know I'm from Surrey myself, and they provide numerous services to new immigrants in our community. So thank you for doing all that work. I know you guys work very hard with the limited resources that you have to provide that service. My question, let's start with the diversity. What impact does it have on women that have to wait 2 years to get their permanent residency? Does it increase risks of violence, or does it decrease risks of violence if they have to wait in that relationship?
Thing, right? The conditional permanent residence for the spousal sponsorship, that's the question?
That's the question.
Okay, so how the same thing, like the woman will, however, the information is given to them that these are your rights and responsibilities, and if abuse is there, this will not be enforced on you, but there is lack of trust because there is so much they hold. The PR card is so important to them, their status, and there is lack of trust that when they will go out, this abuse will go out, and when they report, and they will be deported.
Okay, Ms. Manoni, same question to you. Does this increase the chances of women in a violent relationship, or does it decrease it?
It's not necessarily. There has been an evidence-based research that is being conducted saying how many sponsored cases have been abused or been victims of violence. But however, it makes the position of women very weaker, and it's not equality. And then she's under the threat that I can always be deported if I do not obey or listen to my husband.
Okay, and yourself?
En fait, c'est valable.
Well, it's true both for men and women who are sponsored. There are cases of abuse in both directions. I have an example today of a problem that we are trying to correct. A woman who was sponsored from Algeria, she came to Canada with her husband, and he saw that the mentality here wasn't working for her, and so he took her back to her country. He said it was for vacations. He took her documents, passport, residency card, left them there, and now she's doing everything she can to try and come back. So this is real abuse. We need to find solutions to these sorts of problems so we don't create categories of sort of second-class citizens. Those who are sponsored don't seem to end up having the same rights as those who have their full permanent residency.
Do you currently get federal funding for spousal abuse victims, or also is that funding on a long-term basis, or is it on an ad hoc basis? Can you hear us, diversity?
Oh, sorry, that was for us. No, we don't receive any federal funding for our spousal abuse counseling at this time. So our funding for our Stopping the Violence counseling is currently provincial.
provincial funding. And would you like more funding from the federal government or more programs to help help?
Oh my goodness!
No.
Yes, sir, I would. I think one of the stories that stands out the most for me, we run the Relationship Violence Prevention Program. So this is a program where men who offend are mandated through the court system to come for a 17-week counseling program. This program has a really low recidivism rate and has been very, very successful, and it's something that we would definitely like to see pursued further. However, it has a massive wait list, and so at this time I have 54 men sitting on the wait list for my April program. Now, this past summer, we had a man who was sitting on that wait list, and unfortunately he murdered his wife in a basement suite in Surrey and then took his own life. And it wasn't until we got around to attacking that wait list that we saw that, yes, he in fact was the gentleman that had been involved in that murder-suicide. So these are the things that we're starting to see. It's scary, and we're doing everything we can with the little funding that we have, but it's few and far between. We're having to scrap for every cent we get.
Thank you. And we've heard in this committee, and also I've had numerous conversations with other organizations, and when we talk about credentialing, the ability of the immigrant women and immigrant men coming to this country, their ability to transfer their skills into what is considered equal to Canadian standards. Is that a difficulty that sort of diminishes their ability to integrate into Canadian society? Is that something that government should be working on and helping these immigrant women into this country?
Yes, definitely. I agree that because we have many cases that 4 years, 5 years, they are not even able to find employment. Forget underemployment. They are not able to find the jobs. And so that creates significant mental health issues. And that's, in fact, a lot of tax dollars that goes towards the health. One way, if you do not give them employment, then there is an increase in their mental health issues. And then what are you doing? You are trying to spend more money to address the mental health issues. So that's why it's very imperative and important that accreditation should be considered.
Ms. Stern, do you want to comment on that?
Effectivement, il n'y a pas la...
Well, yes, there's not the recognition of diplomas obtained outside of Quebec. I'm from Quebec, I'll speak in that context. There is a devaluation of education done elsewhere than in Quebec. And so in order to be hired, one must absolutely have experience in Quebec, experience here. And that's something that when you come to Quebec, you don't have. Somebody needs to hire you, obviously, so you can get experience in Quebec. There's a high level of protectionism within professional orders, and there are many of them. Professional orders have protectionist policies that have a major effect. And again, in Quebec, for example, people who come from Northern Africa speak French very, very well. Their French is excellent. But we tell them to come to Quebec because they come to French, because they speak French, but when they come to Quebec, they have to speak English if they want to get a job.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I think that's about the best argument I've heard for federal funding, that the person on the waiting list killed his wife and then himself. It's quite compelling. But I just want to begin by a simple question that I've asked all the other witnesses. In terms of this conditional permanent residence program, do you think it's a good thing or do you think it should be abolished? Can I just ask each of you quickly, starting with Ms. Rosenberger?
Sure. I'll let Ms. Burke answer that.
There are pros and cons.
No,
I have come across women. Yes or no?
Yeah.
If I'm talking of women being abused, no.
No,
if
what?
the women are being abused, no, it should not be there. But if another thing is that men were coming here and running away from the airports, then yeah,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to rush you, but I have so little time. I just want to get on to other things, but I just want to go through this because I've done it with other witnesses. Do you think that program should stay or go?
Should certainly go.
Go. Et madame?
Vous parlez...
You're speaking about a temporary residency visa where people need to live together I believe, for a period of 2 years as a condition before we give them permanent residency. Yes, as a condition. Well, it's quite a delicate situation because, well, it's easy to create conditions to force one to be sent back. So we need to look at that very carefully. I think that there should be criteria. I would put in place more training criteria, more necessary training criteria, a session to follow, like at school. Okay, so I would say 2 no's and one maybe.
Really want to get at is, I agree with Mr. Opitz that the conditions you describe are horrendous, of abuse. I'm not quite sure how common that is, but to the extent it is, it's terrible. I totally agree with Mr. Opitz. But that brings me to Ms. Mandani and Ms. Munadin. You put a lot of weight on training and teaching of skills. Now, if the women are living in conditions they describe, they won't even be allowed to go out to learn those skills. It sounds like they're living like slaves. So is that an issue for you, that some of the women you want to teach finance and skills to are unable because of their family situation to take those lessons, or are they generally free to do so?
We feel that there are barriers, cultural barriers, language barriers, and there are employment issues as well. So definitely there has to be skills which are training programs which are irrelevant to the job market, because our goal is to get them financially independent. Now again, there is a catch-22 situation. That is, if they do not have a permanent resident status, then how do they work? How do they become financially independent?
Well, that's a different issue. I guess my question is, I think we all agree, or at least I do, speaking for myself, that it's a good idea to teach them skills and financial independence for all the reasons you give. But if they're living in a state of near slavery, they might not be able to partake in that training. So my question is that an issue that you confront with any frequency in your training programs, or is it not a major issue?
It is an issue where culture plays a role, where women feel that the man is a bread earner. So that's an issue. But again, we can't say that all the women who are sponsored by their spouses are living in slavery. Right. We will not make that statement. We have not seen that. There are pretty liberal husbands also who believe in equality. So,
okay, I certainly wasn't making that statement either. But to Ms. Rosenberger, I guess my question for you is, you paint such a dire picture. I'm wondering how common it is, and of the women that you see, would there be a substantial proportion that would not be allowed to take training programs because their husbands don't let them, or how bad is it? Or how frequent is the...
No, Right, and keep in mind that we're sharing with you experiences from our counseling programs that are called Stopping the Violence and Children Who Witness Abuse. So the only women that we are seeing are the ones who have actually been through this process, right? We're not seeing the ones who are coming for language classes or the ones who are coming to our skills training centers. We do have those services at Diversity, but in our department, what we see are the women who are in crisis and the families who are in crisis. So the experiences that we share, this is quite common for our clients. Now, whether it's the norm in these communities and cultures, I would say most definitely not. I agree that the majority of women and the majority of marriages are based on a mutual respect and a mutual equality. But what we're looking at are the ones where there is serious danger to the woman and she does not have the resources, the language, or the cultural understanding or the cultural support in order to help get herself out of that situation and into either a transition house.
Well, thank you. That provides you with some comfort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Daniel, assuming the bells are ringing at 5:15, you have until the bells ring.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. Appreciate the opportunity to ask a few questions. It seems to me that this whole situation is beyond just the questions we're asking. It's actually, in many of these circumstances, is culturally ingrained that you have polygamy, you have forced marriages, you have all of these things. And so just to say that we've posted on the website or we've given some paperwork saying that this is the case is not really going to crack the thing. I mean, are those who are forced into marriage situations really understanding their rights with respect to forced marriages, do you think?
We haven't yet dealt with forced marriage case, but I trust on the aspect that there has to be an evidence-based study finding out how many forced marriages, polygamy, marriage of convenience, marriage of fraud, all those cases, and doing a policy analysis saying that conditional permanent residence, how does isn't it a blanket policy? Will it cover all that? There will still, with this policy as well, there will be still continuing fraud marriages, marriage of convenience. We had somebody reported saying, oh, if I go to India and get married, I will get X dowry. So there is also the dowry issue that we know of, right? So basically what we are saying that blanket policy may not curtail or completely eradicate forced marriage or polygamy or all those issues. Right. There could be that one person can be eligible to sponsor only one spouse. That can be a policy that can be looked into.
Madame Dari?
Well, I'll go back to this story of a temporary residency. One wants to have Canadian citizenship. We have to answer an exam on Canada's history and geography. Why not? Why shouldn't there be an exam on culture and on the Canadian mindset? And that would be after training sessions, mandatory training sessions for men and for women. It seems to me that it's very important that people understand how things are, and husbands who don't want their wives to go out will have to let that happen because it's mandatory. And it's important to remember that parental violence is perpetuated by children who see that as their model, as their example.
Sort of begs the question that is any of that going to affect them, given that these are some of their fundamental beliefs, that they are actually, already embracing these things as part of their culture and their religion, and we are now about to impose something that changes some of their fundamentals. Does that make sense?
C'est un choix et un privilège.
It's a choice and a privilege to immigrate to another country. It's a choice of a new way of life, of opening up new horizons, of being more open to the world. So there's also an obligation that comes along with that choice. One is obliged to adapt, and immigrants have the courage to immigrate, so they have enough strength of character to adapt. But we need to give them the tools that they need to do that, and I think that community organizations with their networks are capable of filling a lot of roles, but unfortunately the federal government doesn't provide a lot of funding for that.
And this is a question for all of you, so hopefully you get a few seconds to answer. What tools can we ensure our officers have in their toolbox to identify cases of forced marriage? Anybody want to take it up first? Maybe diversity, since you haven't spoken to me. Yes, okay.
When you mean officers, do you mean you mean immigration officers?
Yeah. How do they make an assessment? Okay, to identify whether it's a forced marriage. I mean, one of the things could be that if the person they're marrying is under age 16. Then that kind of would suggest something like that, right? But are there any other things that you can think of that can help us with that, Ms. Mandini?
The women can be asked individually or interviewed by the officer saying she is forced to get married. And again, the age criteria should be above 18 years of age, where she feels that mature enough to speak.
Right.
To all of the witnesses, unfortunately, all members are being summoned to the House to vote, so we're going to have to close the meeting on behalf of the committee. Your testimony has been very helpful to this committee in the preparation of its report. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.